All right, Chuck Morse here, the Morse Force, Monday through Friday, 12 noon live. And my guest is Joe Sixpack. He is the author of Socialism Sucks. Joe, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Chuck. Pleased to be
Oh,
here.
all right. So, your book is more relevant right now than ever, given the fact that there's a link up in the Drudge Report this morning saying that more young people, more millennials, actually think that socialism is a good idea. Now, let's keep in mind, these are people who don't know their you know what from their elbow in terms of actually making a living. So we know that. But what do you account for this phenomena?
Well, it's been going on for, the last 100 years. And what they really perfected since the 60s is targeting young people. And, the school, I don't call them schools anymore. I call them government socialist indoctrination camps.
Hmm.
They just spoon feed these kids this entitlement, that you're always a victim, never to stand up, pull up put on your big boy pants and get out there and fight and work. It comes from all angles, whether it's nonviolence, multiculturalism, green energy, you name it. It's all designed to tear away at the fabric of what this country was founded upon.
So what you have then is a focus on somehow the young person is told that they're a victim of something, whatever it is. The polluters who own the big companies. Never mind the fact that they turn on a light and expect somehow light to appear magically, or it's that somehow this whole concept that goes back to really the central conspiracy theory of Marxism, which is that they're exploited and there's a conspiracy to exploit people by somehow more successful people, and that they are, victims of this, that they're being abused, they're being exploited. And I can see and it appeals to the dark side of all of us. I mean, it appeals to the darker side of young people in particular who are vulnerable to this kind of message, that they're somehow victims. And I think it's been particularly destructive in the minority community, the people of color who are told, you're a victim of racism and therefore you should hate white people, as opposed to lifting themselves up and, taking a piece of the American dream.
Absolutely. The entire of my book is dedicated to that. I call it rope and ladder theory. The
Mm-hmm.
Democrats have, the black communities in a whole, and rather than give them a ladder so that they can climb out of their own volition, they put down a rope and pull them halfway up and then leave them dangling there. LBJ used to call the Civil Rights Act the N Act and said, I'll have those N's voting Democrat for the next 200 years. Well, 60, 70 years later, how wrong was he? This is all
Yeah.
by design. You know,
And, and and yet President Trump is making inroads among the minority community. They don't want to. The mainstream media doesn't want to admit this, and I think this is one of the main reasons why they so despise and fear Trump, because he actually could change the entire paradigm for the next generations, as he actually is empowering people. He's helping develop economic cohesion among people. He's helping, unions. He's helping labor. He's helping industry. And he's doing all these things that actually empower people in the real sense. And that's a terrible threat to this left-wing socialistic idea, which is that the state is the god, and that they have to worship the state. I had a relative of mine recently, very left-wing, who said to me that her main criticism of Trump is that he's not, like, she doesn't feel that he's governing. The whole country's just sort of floating along like a ship without a captain. And,
hogwash.
well, the thing is that the reason she sees it that way is because the left wingers like to see the government run things. They want to see them running their lives. They want to see them handle. This is what we're going to take over healthcare. This is how we're taking over education. This is what we're doing. And that Trump is dismantling that. So there's a feeling like what's happening. It's like a very disorienting feeling for them.
Well, get out of the way. The flow of freedom of ideas is the most powerful force in the world. And those socialists, and I include half the Republican Party in when I say socialists
Yeah.
there, that's the thing they fear the most. Socialism leads to a lack of common sense and a lack of free thinking. And that's the thing that scares the socialists the most. I mean, I've lived a third of my life in Europe. I've seen it firsthand how it degrades any ability to think for yourself. That's the scary part. That was my motivation for writing this book, to try to get to these young people to fight back against it. It appeals to the worst of human nature, and it kills the human spirit.
All right, my guest is Joe Sixpack. The book is Socialism Sucks. I'll be putting up a copy of it as a tag on this program. And I think that, Joe, you're kind of touching right at the core of the issue here, which is this idea that, the whole socialist endeavor, the whole experiment, and I think it was Whittaker Chambers in Witness who I think said it best when he said that socialism or communism is the world's second oldest religion. It goes back to Adam and Eve, when the serpent, who represents the satanic influence, told Eve that she could be as God and that she could know everything and know good and evil, and that she could basically overthrow God and become God on earth, that we could be perfected. And then when she gave Adam a piece, they entered into a conspiracy to overthrow God. And that the results were that they were punished and they were driven from the Garden of Eden. But nevertheless, every generation has continued to try to effect this conspiracy to, what Chambers called the choice between man or God. That either we believe we're sovereign citizens under God, that were created in the image of God, but we're not God, or this clique of powerful, usually elitists, who say that we can be God, we can overthrow God and create a perfectible earth. And, it's completely unnatural, and it runs against, it's not normal, because we're not gods. We're simply vulnerable human beings. And yet the appeal is stunning for them. I mean, this idea that we can change the world, we could change human nature by force. I mean, we can change the world using intelligence and using freedom and using success and using, knowledge, but not by means of this kind of making literally the human being something different, something that we're not, and using force to do it. I mean, that was the main theme behind communism. That was what the Soviet thing was all about, creating this new man and this new world.
Yeah, but you know what? You cut right through all. I mean, you can talk about ideology, blah, blah, blah. It's all about money. You look at Soviet Russia. Where was the money with those elites? The same guys who are trying to seize power over here, and they do it under the guise of helping people, helping the poor. Man, when anybody tells you that's what they're out for, run. Because what they're out for is the money. And the wealthy people in this country do not hold the majority of the wealth. It rests with the middle class. And that's what they're after. They want crony capitalism with the big corporations, and they want to destroy the middle class. And that's what the young people don't get. It's all about money. Whatever the issue, just follow the money, and that'll tell you all you need to know.
Well, Joe, why do you think it is then that so many of the richest, what Occupy Wall Street called the top 1%, which they were right about, there is a top 1%. Why are these people so far on the left? Why are they supporters of leftism to the extent that they are? And you could take a look, for example, at Forbes magazine every year publishes the top 100 richest people in the country. And to the degree we can determine their ideology, they're all liberals, with a few minor exceptions. And then as you go down the list, the further you go down, the more the conservatives come up. But the real money, the Facebook and Google and Amazon and all these guys, all on the left, all supporters of left-wing causes, Democratic supporters, usually on the left side of the Democratic Party. And yet they made their money, assumedly, from capitalism. So why are they so left?
Sure. I mean, George Soros is the best example of that. He, foreigner, Hungarian, comes in here, makes his money on capitalism, and then does everything he can to push socialism. It's because they can afford to. Poor guys can't afford, middle-class guys can't afford. Look at the riots in France. Look what happened to the gas prices when those same people who are out there burning cars were pushing for all this green energy BS. Well, now it's time to pay the piper, and guess what? They're flipping cars and destroying businesses. Those guys can afford it. Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, George Soros. These guys got the money for it.
They got the money, and it's the fashionable thing to do. And you
Absolutely.
know, but the weird thing about it is that they made their money using a free system. Why would they want to deprive that possibility for the rest of us?
Because they don't care about the rest of us. They just want to assuage their own feelings. They got so much feelings that need to be assuaged, and that's all.
Well, I mean, if they had any feelings, they would maybe throw a few crumbs off the table for the rest of us. I remember when Nancy Pelosi, when there was a tax cut, she said, "Oh, those are crumbs." She
Yeah, because you
said,
live in Ivory Tower.
"Yeah, I mean, there you have, $1,000 is a lot of money for a working family.
Hell yeah.
It might mean that you'll be able to buy some clothes for your children when they go off to school. I mean, and yet Nancy Pelosi is one of the richest members of Congress. Now she's back as Speaker of the House. And I'm looking at Drudge Report. The first thing they did, number one resolution, was all presidential, vice presidential candidates have to release 10 years of tax returns, which is a way to get Trump. And bunch of other things that are completely, I mean, don't they get how stupid that is? I mean, you can't, in this constitutional republic, force someone to turn over their tax returns. It's, whether he should or not, it's another question. But the fact is that if he has to, then that opens the door for such an authoritarian grab for power. I mean, those documents. The whole principle of it is that it's private. It's like telling somebody, it's like lawyer-client privilege. It's like going to a confession and telling the priest he has to turn over the confession. I mean, these things are property. I mean, they're private. And the fact that they would do this shows how ignorant they are of the Constitution and how hateful they are in their agenda to try to take out probably the most successful president in our lifetime.
Absolutely. They're total control freaks. That's what socialism's all about. That's why it gets along so well with Islam. They're both control mechanisms.
Right.
And that's why they feed off of each other.
And I think that, by the way, has a lot to do with these European protests and this European movement, and that is migration and the reassertion of European sovereignty and the European culture.
That's why I left Europe. Yeah. You should have seen how it changed between 2000 and 2010. I sat there and watched it grow up around me to the point where I had to move my family after about 7 years because it got too nasty where we were living in this quiet, sleepy little town. And then finally I said, you know what? I got to get my kids out of here because I could stay up here and get rich. My kids could grow up and be spoiled little rich zombies that couldn't think for themselves, where the possibility that my daughter gets gang raped by a bunch of Lebanese youth was a real possibility. Or I could bring them back here and teach them how to be free thinkers. Well, I opted for the latter because it's getting nasty over there.
And now that you're here, we see something similar happening in that there's this absolutely insane and irrational attempt by the new Democratic Congress to not have a border secured. This is so, I mean, it goes beyond just simply the fact that you and I and everyone listening to the show, we have the right to secure the borders of our own home. You have a right to decide who enters your home and who doesn't. And we all have our own walls. It's called a front door and a back door. And they have locks on those doors. And we have locked our cars. I mean, the people listening to the show, I'll bet you your car out in the driveway is locked. It's normal to create a border so that you can control who enters and who doesn't. I mean, animals understand this. Try to go in the space of a dog. They don't need to register it with the Register of Deeds, but they have a sense of property. They know where the line is drawn. I mean, you go into a bird's nest, you forget, or a beehive. This is something that's obviously normal and natural for any sovereign nation acting for the people of that nation to decide who enters the national home. And yet they seem to have this bizarre notion that there's something virtuous about leaving an open border. What's going on with that?
That's the lie they push. What it's really about is bringing in more people to get them dependent, stuck on the government tip like they have with the black community. It's the same deal. That's all they're doing, bringing in future voters.
Right.
And ensuring that socialism will be alive and well for generations to come. Dependence.
Yeah, it's also an unholy alliance between them and the big corporations and the Chamber of Commerce who want cheap labor. And in the process, they're undermining the advances that labor has made in this country over 100 years. You know, the American labor movement, which I respect and which I've been a part of, they have earned their place at the table. I mean, through, as American citizens, they've gotten together in an assembly, which is what a union is, and they've represented their interests and negotiated with the corporation, and they've developed a position. And to bring in cheap labor is going to undermine that position. And we have to put the interests both of labor and of corporations first.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't think that's as high on their list of priorities as because they don't care. They don't really care about anybody or anything but their own power. But I would say it's 85%. The issue is creating that dependent class and ensuring that it sustains over time.
No, I mean, this is what they've done, particularly the destructive element of what they've done to the black community since LBJ. And LBJ's Assistant Secretary of Labor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, warned about this. Yep.
Yep.
And you probably mentioned it in your book. He said that the black family back then was intact, the black church was intact, that black people were coming in spite of real racism, Jim Crow laws. They were assimilating into the economic upper echelons, and then this comes along and it creates all this dependency, and the racist left basically treated black people like they were children, and they gave women money to get rid of their husbands, and then they gave them more money for every child they had, and so they wonder why there's an increase in social problems and crime and violence. I mean, the family was destroyed, as Patrick Moynihan predicted. Not destroyed, but largely compromised.
He was brilliant. He foresaw all this happening. He was kind of like my, Ayn Rand, who wrote that book, Atlas Shrugged, way back. She foresaw where all this was going. Daniel Patrick, he had it. He, like you said, he went up against LBJ, and LBJ wasn't having it because he was getting those ends voting for him for the next 200 years.
And now the racist left basically uses micro-racism, because real racism has in many ways been reduced, to get at their enemies. In other words, they'll hold up a microscope and say, you have a racist gene. Something you said back in 1962, improves, and then they destroy people that way, and it's becoming a science. It's like the new quack science for them. So this is what we're looking at. This is what we're looking at now with this new corrupt Congress.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's going to take a couple of people like Trump out there really beating the drum and calling attention. Call these people out. Why don't the Republicans call these guys out, huh? If the Republicans were so altruistic as they claim to be, if a moron like me can see the game that's fixed and call them out, how come the Republican politicians don't do it? I reckon it's because they're probably on the same side. It's not about Democrat versus Republican. It's about us versus them. 535 stuffed shirts on Capitol Hill and one erstwhile president's against the rest of the 360 million of us. Well, I reckon the collective intelligence of the many far exceeds that of the few.
I think you're right, and I think that the Republicans are almost as bad. In fact, in many ways, worse. Not all of them. I mean, there's a good group of them also, but the ones in charge have been. I mean, the Paul Ryans of the world. I mean, they're like they've done nothing. I mean, they're just footprints for this growth in the nanny state and the dependency state. And there are some good signs. I mean, we have a federal judge in Texas actually took a little time to read the Constitution one day and see that Obamacare is not constitutional. So, I mean, every so often there's a small victory. But the broader issue, and the issue I think that you're bringing up in your book, Joe Sixpack, is the kind of the cultural issue. How do we get people involved in once again the American dream and reasserting their natural sovereignty and finding their own lives and realizing that you don't need the nanny state. So talk a little bit more about the premise of your book, Socialism Sucks.
Well, basically the bottom line is that, as I mentioned, they're a bunch of power-hungry, people that are out for themselves and feeding lies to the young people to get them all soft-headed, that it's not about getting out and working hard and intelligently to get ahead and improve your lot. It's almost like when Obama said, business owners, you didn't build that. It's that same mentality that, we're gonna take care of you. You don't have to want for anything. What you have to make them understand is, yeah, if the government, they want a place where you don't have to worry where you're going to sleep. You don't have to worry about your food. You have free health care. They got that already. It's called prison. So go knock over a bank and let the government take care of you for the rest of your life. Otherwise, a government big enough to give you everything you want is certainly big enough to take away everything you got, and is rather likely to do so.
That's right. And now, of course, the left is tolerating the one area where you would think they'd be strong on only because of this pathological hatred for Trump, and that is letting these thugs at the Mueller Group and some of these other people going in and breaking into people's offices and stealing their documents and raiding, and prosecuting people and destroying their lives for some stupid, they said this in 1962, but it was actually on March 5th, not March 4th, so they're going to prison unless they testify against Trump. And this kind of stuff, which is typical of a Nazi or of a communist state, they're all looking the other way on that. They're not fine, if it stops Trump. And they're creating a precedent for that. I mean, maybe they never really were champions of individual rights. Maybe this really is a reflection of their authoritarian nature. It's just unmasked now because the shoe is on the other foot, and there is a potential that people are waking up to freedom under this president.
Well, let's hope. But you're certainly right. If you look back in history, the violence always comes from the left, and you're seeing it with people, the people who are elected in the Democratic Party calling Maxine Waters. I mean, it started under Obama, agitating against the police officers. Look what he affected over his 8 years of reign of terror. The way he's got public opinion against the cops who are getting shot at, whatever the rate is, 80 a year or something ridiculous like that, due to, their calls to violence. And, it's just, it shows that there's no logic behind. They say phrases, and when you try to engage one of these people, they are not able to have a conversation because all they're doing is repeating a mantra that somebody else, a puppet master, has passed down the line. Everybody reads, says the headline in the New York Times, but when you try to engage them and get some logic from them, it doesn't exist. There's nothing there but slogans and bumper stickers and mantras, and that's what.
Well, that's why they don't talk to us anymore. And I think that
right.
Joe, you're quite right, and I would mention to our listeners here that if you're in a conversation with a liberal, just try to get to some logic of what they're saying. Say to them, why do you oppose the building of a wall on the southern border exactly? Why are you supportive of this eugenic program of healthcare which decides who lives and who dies? Could you please explain this? Why is this moral? And you'll find that their head will start to spin, and they'll start spitting nickels and rolling around and screaming and there's no right. I mean, there's no rationale. And then, of course, they launched the new Democratic Congress with this Muslim congresswoman from Minnesota referring to President Trump as a motherfucker. I mean, that's nice, great, and they're claiming that Trump is nasty. I'd like to see that. Trump speaks honestly. He doesn't. He might be at times bordering on the cruel, but he basically is. His comments are political. He criticizes people for their politics, not calling them out for insulting their parents and making such a vulgar statement. But I think that tells us everything we need to know about them.
I think you're right. No class, no dignity. Those things are just words to them.
Exactly, and yet they posture. Anyway,
yeah.
Joe, let my listeners know and my viewers know how they can get your book. Do you want to give out a website information, how they can find out information about you?
Yeah, we got a website that's coming up. It's not out there yet, but it's going to be realjoesixpack.com, and on Facebook. Come on Facebook, Real Joe Sixpack. We have fun. We get some libs in there who try to justify it, and it's just like a pylon. It's a lot of fun.
Well, let's stay in touch and we can collaborate. And as things come up, drop me a note. We'll do it. We'll do another show.
That sounds great, Chuck. I look forward to it.
All right, Joe Sixpack. The book is Socialism Sucks. Joe, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
All right,
the best.
take care.
Take care.
All right.